At my grandfather's 78th birthday party, security pulled up a video no one saw coming and my future ended right there, right in that moment. My name is Valerie Stratton. After the party wrapped up, I went back to the venue just to grab the handbag I'd left behind on my chair. I figured it would take 2 minutes tops. But as I stepped into the hallway, a security guard stopped me cold. He glanced around, then whispered for me to follow him into the control room. "What you're about to see is going to completely change the way you think," he said, his voice so low it sent chills down my spine. And he was right. I collapsed right there on the spot. He hit play on the footage from the overhead camera at our table. I watched it all unfold in crystal clear detail the second I turned my back to toast my grandfather. Someone close to me pulled a small vial from their pocket and poured a clear liquid straight into my water glass. Another person stepped in to block the view while the third scanned the room and gave a quick nod of approval. They shared this quiet little smile, the kind I'd always thought was warm and familiar. As I turned back and took a big sip without a clue, my hands started shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the desk to stay upright. My stomach twisted like I was going to be sick, and my mind just went blank. The guard asked quietly if I was okay, or if he should call someone. I could only shake my head. No words, just tears rolling down without a sound. The people closest to me in the world had done this right in front of everyone, and I'd drunk it like it was nothing. Where in the world are you hearing this story from? Drop a comment below with your location right now, and tell me if you ever discovered the people you trust most. The ones who raised you were the ones trying to take everything from you at a family celebration. What would be the very first thing you'd do? I really want to know your thoughts. Share them down there. I drove home in silence that night, the city lights blurring past the windows as my mind replayed that footage over and over. By the time I pulled into the driveway of our family estate on the outskirts of Chicago, my hands were still gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I headed straight to my private office on the second floor, the one room in the house that had always felt like mine alone, and sank into the leather chair behind the desk. Sitting there, in the dim glow of the desk lamp, I let myself think back to how deeply I'd poured everything into Stratton Real Estate Group over the years. Grandpa Harold had started trusting me with major responsibilities right around the time I turned 30, handing me projects that no one else in the family dared touch. I remembered one deal in particular from 5 years ago. A prime downtown parcel that was tangled in a bad old contract threatening to cost us $20 million outright. I flew out to negotiate face-to-face with the sellers, worked through nights reviewing every clause and turned it around single-handedly. When it closed, Grandpa pulled me aside in front of the entire executive board, slapped me on the back, and said loud enough for everyone to hear that I was the only one with the vision to see things through. It felt like real recognition, the kind that made all the long hours worth it. But my parents and Grant were always there on the sidelines, offering those polite smiles before steering the conversation elsewhere. Dad would say something like, "Valerie did a solid job on that one, but leading long-term as a woman in this industry, it's tough, you know." Mom would chime in smoothly. "Grant's picking things up quickly. He'll be ready to step in and help steady everything." And Grant himself would just nod along, rarely diving into the actual work, yet my parents defended him every time Grandpa pressed for updates on his contributions. I'd brush it off as them trying to keep things fair between siblings, making sure no one felt left out. Looking back now, though, it hits different. It was this slow erasure of what I'd built, treating my successes like temporary fixes because in their eyes a daughter couldn't possibly hold the res permanently. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the framed photos on the wall, me shaking hands at closing ceremonies. Grandpa and I reviewing blueprints late into the evening. Those moments had felt solid, unbreakable. Yet the way my family downplayed them, always redirecting praise towards some vague future where Grant would take over naturally, started to make sense in a twisted way. They'd positioned me as the capable interim leader, the one who fixed problems until the real heir, the son, was prepared. All those board meetings where I'd presented growth strategies that doubled our portfolio value in certain sectors, and the response was mild approval followed by comments about how exhausting it must be for me. I had proven myself with hard numbers, revenue spikes under my oversight, risks averted that saved millions more than just that one deal. Properties we'd acquired turned profitable faster because of decisions I pushed through, despite pushback, but none of it seemed to stick with them. It was always framed as helpful support rather than true leadership capability. The more I thought about it, the clearer the pattern became. family dinners where Grandpa would boast about my latest win only for Mom to pivot to Grant's golf game or some casual networking he'd done. Dad nodding along, reinforcing that the business needed someone who could commit without the added pressures women face. Even Brooke, Grant's wife, would add little remarks about how nice it would be when things settled and everyone could relax more. I'd laugh it off, tell myself it was old-fashioned thinking that would fade with time. After all, Grandpa saw my worth. He'd said it outright multiple times. But now, alone in that office, the doubt crept in deeper than ever. If they truly believed I was only a stopgap because of my gender, what else were they capable of to make their version of the future happen? I stood up and paced the room, stopping at the window overlooking the manicured grounds. The estate had been in the family for generations, a symbol of everything we'd built in Chicago's competitive real estate world. I'd fought to expand it responsibly, focusing on sustainable developments that aligned with modern demands. Those efforts had paid off in ways the numbers couldn't fully capture, reputation boosts that opened doors to partnerships others in the industry envied. Yet here I was questioning if my own blood saw any of it as permanent. The betrayal from that footage wasn't just the act itself. It was the realization that my contributions had been undermined, all along dismissed before I even knew there was a fight. By the time I finally turned off the light and headed to bed, exhaustion mixed with a cold resolve. Whatever came next, I couldn't let them rewrite my role in this legacy any longer. A couple of days later, I decided to act, refusing to let the shock paralyze me any longer. I contacted a private laboratory in downtown Chicago that I'd worked with before on environmental testing for property acquisitions, a place known for handling sensitive corporate cases without questions. I drove there personally that afternoon, sealing the remaining water from the party in a sterile container I'd grabbed from a medical supply store on the way, along with a fresh blood draw I'd done at an urgent care clinic nearby. At the lab, I handed over the samples in person, stressing the need for urgent processing, while keeping my explanation minimal: possible contamination from an event, nothing more. The technician nodded professionally, promising preliminary findings soon. Waiting turned out to be torture. The first email update arrived 4 days in, and it only heightened my anxiety. They'd isolated unusual chemical traces but couldn't classify them definitively without comparative data. The compound didn't align with standard databases for poisons or common contaminants, so accuracy required cross-referencing additional material. I couldn't afford delays, so I risked going back to the venue that very night. I messaged Marcus Hale directly. He'd slipped me his contact info during that initial encounter, sensing I'd need it. He agreed to meet me after hours at a discreet service door around back. The building was mostly dark, echoing with distant cleaning noises as he guided me to the storage area. He'd thoughtfully set aside one of the actual glasses from our table, unwashed and bagged, explaining he'd held onto it because something felt wrong that night. We also downloaded longer clips from a secondary camera angle that captured more context around the table. My nerves were on edge the entire time. One janitor's cart rolling too close forced me to freeze in the shadows until it passed. My breath held tight to avoid any sound. Back with the enhanced samples, I delivered them first thing the following morning. The full report finally confirmed everything. A specialized industrial chemical, restricted to research settings, engineered to induce temporary cognitive impairment, gradually eroding concentration, short-term recall, and sound judgment, while mimicking natural decline from overwork or age. Stopping exposure allowed recovery, but prolonged use could make someone appear reliably incompetent in high-stakes roles. The lab noted its non-medical application violated federal controls on incapacitating substances, potentially falling under assault statutes if used maliciously. To tie it directly to the source, I needed physical evidence from inside the house. I bided my time until the upcoming weekend, when the family scheduled their regular golf retreat at the club in Oakbrook, about 30 meters west, enough time for the estate to clear out. Saturday morning, once their cars pulled away, I moved quickly to Grant's private study on the first floor. Using a duplicate key I'd kept from years ago when helping organize his files, I eased open the locked lower drawer of his desk. My pulse thundered in my ears as I sifted through papers. There they were, detailed statements from multiple Las Vegas resorts, overdue markers piling up to $3 million, complete with escalating interest warnings and collection threats. Tucked behind them in a false bottom compartment was the matching vial, small, unmarked glass, with a dropper top residue matching the lab description visible at the bottom. I photographed every page, meticulously capturing account numbers, dates, and signatures for undeniable proof. The process took longer than expected, my fingers trembling slightly on the phone screen to avoid blur, paranoia built with every creak of the old house settling. I finished just as gravel crunched outside far earlier than planned. I secured the drawer exactly as found, slipped the key back into my pocket, and exited through the side hall to my own area upstairs. Reaching my door, I heard voices downstairs moments later. They'd cut the outing short for some reason. I leaned against the wall, steadying my breathing, relieved but shaken by how close that had been. The evidence was now mine, solid and irrefutable, linking the substance straight to Grant's desperation. For the next week I wrestled with myself, hiding the encrypted drive containing all the evidence in a locked safe behind books in my office. Sleep became impossible most nights. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every family moment in my head and wondering how it had come to this. The thought of exposing everything terrified me, not just because it would shatter the family image we'd maintained for decades, but because Grandpa Harold's health was fragile at 78, and a betrayal this deep might push him over the edge. On the other hand, staying silent meant handing over everything I'd fought for, letting them win and rewrite my place in the company as some kind of failure. The conflict tore at me constantly, leaving me exhausted and short-tempered, even in routine meetings. I finally decided to test the waters with Mom, first clinging to the slim hope that maternal instinct might override whatever loyalty she felt toward tradition. I suggested we meet at our usual coffee spot in Lincoln Park, just a short drive from the estate, framing it as needing advice about work pressure. She agreed quickly, and we sat at an outdoor table on a quiet weekday morning away from prying ears. I started gently mentioning how off I'd been feeling lately, and asking if she'd noticed anything different about me. Then I eased into saying I suspected someone close didn't want me leading the company anymore. Mom looked at me for a long moment over her cup, her expression softening at first like she might open up. She sighed and set the cup down. "Valerie, you're a woman running a major operation like this. It's demanding in ways that wear people down over time. Grandpa will come around eventually. Putting Grant in charge is better for the long-term stability of the family." I felt my stomach drop, but I pressed anyway. "Do you really think I'm not strong enough after everything I've proven?" She gave a sad smile, reaching across to pat my hand briefly. "It's not about strength, sweetheart. Our family has always passed the leadership to sons. It's how things have stayed strong through generations." She didn't admit anything outright, didn't even blink when I hinted at foul play, but her eyes darted away when I held her gaze too long. The avoidance was clear as day. She was protecting the plan, choosing the so-called legacy over her own daughter. The conversation ended politely enough. We talked about superficial things like the weather and upcoming events. But inside I was reeling. Driving back the city, traffic blurred around me as the weight settled in. Mom had made her choice and it wasn't me. That afternoon I walked through the estate gardens alone, trying to process the confirmation that blood ties weren't enough to guarantee loyalty. I'd always assumed her support was genuine, even when it came with those subtle qualifications about gender roles in business. Now, every past comment replayed with new meaning, how she'd praise my deals but always follow with concerns about burnout, or suggest I needed more balance that coincidentally aligned with stepping aside. The pain wasn't just anger. It was this deep ache of loss, realizing the mother-daughter bond I'd counted on had limits defined by outdated expectations. I sat on a bench overlooking the lake, view our property backed onto letting the quiet sink in while I weighed my options again. Going public with the evidence would destroy more than reputations. It would erase any illusion of unity we'd projected to partners and competitors alike. By evening, the internal battle intensified as I reviewed the files once more on my laptop in locked mode. The lab report's clinical language contrasted sharply with the personal devastation it represented. I thought about Grandpa, how he'd built the firm from scratch after moving to Chicago in his 20s, fighting through economic downturns that sank other developers. He'd chosen me because he saw the same drive in me, not because of gender but despite the industry's biases. Letting this scheme succeed would betray that trust more than anything. Yet confronting it meant accepting that my parents valued an abstract tradition over their child's well-being and achievements. The nights blurred together that week. Meals skipped, conversations with staff kept minimal to hide my distraction. I caught myself second-guessing every interaction, wondering if Brooke knew too or if Grant had confided in others. The turning point came midweek when I overheard a phone call drifting from Dad's study, something about finalizing details with Victor before the announcement party. It wasn't enough to record clearly, but the tone confirmed they were moving forward confidently, assuming my decline would seal the deal. That snippet hardened something inside me. The doubt lingered. The hurt didn't vanish, but the fear of loss shifted. Losing the company I'd helped shape would hurt, but losing myself to their manipulation would be worse. Mom's words echoed not as comfort but as the final push. She'd chosen sides, and it forced me to choose mine definitively. With the inheritance party only weeks away, I realized I couldn't handle this alone and contacted Thomas Whitaker, Grandpa's oldest friend and the one person who'd been there since the company's founding days. I met him in his private office after business hours, a quiet space filled with old blueprints and photos from their early projects. I spread out the evidence on his desk, the full lab report, the photographs I'd taken, the audio files, and watched his reaction shift from concern to outright fury as the pieces fell into place. He didn't waste time with doubt. He gripped my shoulder and said we'd safeguard the foundation of everything Grandpa built, no exceptions. The challenges started immediately when we tried moving the critical documents. The original property deeds, founding, share certificates, and primary contracts were scattered across multiple secure locations, including the family's primary bank with its strict monitoring for unusual activity. We couldn't risk large transfers that might flag alerts to Dad or the board. So we divided the work into careful small steps over several evenings. We drive to different branches around the Chicago metro area, scanning and uploading portions at a time, before physically relocating originals to a neutral international facility Thomas had access to through long-standing overseas contacts. One close call happened at a suburban branch when a manager recognized Thomas from past dealings and started asking about the reorganization we covered with talk of routine estate planning updates. But it left us both on edge for days. Meanwhile, Thomas introduced me to a specialist physician he knew through discreet channels, someone experienced in handling exposure to restricted substances. The treatment protocol kicked off right away, but recovery wasn't smooth or quick. Early stages brought severe vertigo that left me bedridden for hours, unable to stand without the world spinning violently. Migraines pounded relentlessly, and fatigue hit in waves that made even reading emails feel impossible. I coped by confining myself to my room or telling everyone the pressure of upcoming events was catching up with me. The doctor adjusted dosages carefully, warning that pushing too fast could worsen symptoms temporarily. The deception grew harder as my condition fluctuated. Grant noticed the inconsistencies, first cornering me in the kitchen one morning with a pointed look. "You're moving around better lately, feeling stronger." His tone carried suspicion under the casual concern. I deflected with complaints about sporadic good days, but he pressed again a few evenings later during dinner prep. Dad joined the scrutiny during our shortened strategy sessions, studying me across the table before commenting that the leadership load might be too much right now. "Are you positive you want to keep pushing this hard?" he'd ask, eyes lingering. I amplified the performance, trailing off mid-sentence in discussions, or resting my head in my hands to simulate exhaustion. Grandpa's worry deepened with every report from my parents about my struggles. They ramped up private talks with him, emphasizing the need for decisive action to protect the company's direction. He'd pull me aside in the library for heartfelt checks, holding my hands as he searched my face. "Are you really okay with all this responsibility right now?" he'd say softly. "I never want to burden you if it's too much." The guilt gnawed at me for keeping him in the dark, knowing the full truth would devastate him, but revealing it prematurely risked everything we'd secured. I'd reassure him weakly that I was managing all while the internal conflict raged. Risks mounted in other ways too. A scheduled bank audit nearly overlapped with one transfer, forcing a last-minute cancellation and reschedule. My symptoms swung unpredictably. Clarity returned in bursts, strong enough to review complex projections, sharply only for nausea to strike during conversations. I timed weak moments around family presents, slouching in chairs or excusing myself early from meals. Mom observed silently, most times her expression unreadable since our coffee meeting. The household atmosphere tightened, everyone orbiting the approaching party with different expectations. The day of the inheritance announcement party finally came, filling our family estate on the outskirts of Chicago with a mix of excitement and unspoken pressure. More than 100 guests arrived throughout the afternoon. Veteran developers who'd partnered with Grandpa on landmark projects, attorneys handling our trusts, bankers from institutions tied to our financing, and extended relatives who rarely showed up otherwise. The ballroom had been transformed with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over linen-covered tables, fresh orchids flown in from a conservatory downtown, and a string quartet playing subtle classics in the corner. Servers circulated with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres, keeping glasses full while conversations flowed about recent commercial leases and downtown revitalization trends. I navigated the room carefully, greeting clusters of acquaintances while intentionally letting my grip waver on the stem of my glass, spilling a drop or two to sell the ongoing struggle. When approaching a group of executives I'd collaborated with on the Magnificent Mile expansion, I paused as if searching for words, asking one vice president to repeat his name. Even though we'd met dozens of times, they responded with polite concern, patting my arm and suggesting I sit soon. The act felt exhausting but necessary, reinforcing the narrative my parents had pushed for months. I'd sent Victor Langford a personal invitation, framed as an olive branch, noting Grandpa's desire to move past old grievances as he transitioned leadership. He showed up promptly, dressed impeccably, and working the room with handshakes and reminiscences about deals from 20 years back. I watched him from across the space, exchanging brief nods when our eyes met, all while keeping my distance until the right moment. Multiple times throughout the evening, I slipped away to verify preparations. The USB drive stayed secure in an inner pocket of my clutch, holding the complete extended footage. Marcus had secured audio files from discrete placements, capturing planning discussions, the comprehensive laboratory breakdown of the restricted compound, and high-resolution images of the vial residue, alongside Grant's casino debt summaries. The independent technician I'd contracted, someone recommended through a trusted contact, outside family circles, confirmed he was positioned at the control station, ready to trigger the main screen on my discreet signal via a small remote in my hand. My parents and Grant stayed clustered near Grandpa at the elevated head, language telling. Mom leaned in frequently with gentle touches on his arm. Dad gesturing emphatically about future stability, while Grant sat forward eagerly, occasionally glancing my way with what looked like satisfaction. Brooke remained at his side, offering supportive smiles to the conversation. I caught fragments as I passed nearby, phrases about protecting legacy assets and ensuring smooth continuity that aligned perfectly with their private agenda. Grandpa's gaze found me repeatedly amid the crowd, his eyes reflecting both pride in hosting and worry over my visible fatigue. During a brief lull, when the quartet paused between pieces, he beckoned me closer. He took my hand in both of his, the familiar strength still there despite his years. "How are you managing tonight?" he asked softly, scanning my face with that penetrating look he'd always had. I managed a nod and quiet reassurance that everything was fine, even as adrenaline surged through me, knowing the sequence was almost upon us. Guests began migrating toward assigned seats as dinner service wrapped silverware clinking, while anticipation built for the program's highlight, Grandpa's long-awaited declaration of succession. The MC took the stage smoothly, welcoming everyone and sharing light stories about Grandpa's early risks, acquiring distressed properties during Chicago's tougher economic periods that ultimately positioned us for growth. Laughter rippled appropriately, glasses raised in casual toasts. I positioned myself strategically near an aisle, close enough to intervene quickly but not drawing attention. Victor mingled near a group discussing potential joint ventures, oblivious to his role in what was coming. The room's energy shifted as dessert plates cleared, conversations lowering in volume while all eyes turned forward. Grandpa rose slowly to warm applause, adjusting the microphone with steady hands before beginning. He spoke of gratitude for partnerships spanning decades, crediting specific individuals in the audience for contributions that shaped Stratton Real Estate Group into its current standing. My parents flanked him supportively, Grant shifting in his seat with barely concealed expectation. The build-up felt endless, every word amplifying the stakes, as Grandpa transitioned toward revealing his chosen path forward for the firm he'd founded and nurtured through every market cycle. The hall went completely silent as Grandpa rose to speak, the clink of silverware, stopping abruptly while every guest turned toward the het. Grandpa Harold took the microphone with both hands, his voice carrying that familiar authority, despite the slight tremor from age, ready to announce the successor he'd chosen after years of careful thought. I stood up quickly before he could begin, my tone soft and unsteady, as I asked for permission to say a few words of thanks to the family first. I managed a faint smile, giving the subtle signal to the technician. The large screen lit up behind him, and the extended footage started playing in high definition, the exact moment from the birthday party, when my parents and Grant tampered with my drink, complete with Marcus Hale's recorded warning. What you're about to see is going to completely change the way you think. The room froze as the clip showed Dad keeping watch, Mom blocking the view, and Grant carefully adding the substance from the vial. Next came the audio recordings of their planning sessions, voices clear as they discussed selling off prime assets cheaply to Victor after making me appear unfit. The lab report followed, slide by slide, detailing the restricted chemicals' effects on cognition. Then, the photographs of the remaining vial, and Grant's $3 million in gambling debts with overdue notices. Absolute silence stretched for what felt like minutes, the kind where no one dared breathe. Grandpa stared at the screen, then turned slowly to my parents and Grant, his face draining of color. He asked only one thing, voice rough and broken. "Is this true?" No one answered. Mom bowed her head, avoiding his eyes. Dad stammered something incoherent about misunderstandings. Grant went pale, mouth opening and closing without sound. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispers starting in the back rows as realization spread. I faced them directly, keeping my voice steady despite everything inside me. "You did this to me because you believed a daughter couldn't lead, that only a son deserved to carry on the family tradition." Victor Langford bolted up from his seat near the front, knocking over a glass as he tried to edge toward the exit, but security personnel I'd stationed discreetly blocked the doors. The officers I'd coordinated with in advance entered from the side entrances, moving efficiently through the aisles. They read the charges: conspiracy to defraud and attempted harm. First to Dad, then Mom, Grant, and finally Victor, cuffing each one as the Miranda rights echoed in the stunned room. Murmurs turned to gasps, phones coming out despite the no recording signs. Some longtime partners looked away in discomfort. Others stared in open shock at the family unraveling before them. Grandpa sank back into his chair, one hand clutching his chest while the other gripped the table edge. His eyes locked on me with a mix of pain and deep regret. I stood there through it all, no tears coming, just this hollow emptiness settling in as the people who'd raised me were led out in handcuffs past tables of horrified guests. The quartet had stopped playing long ago, leaving only the sounds of footsteps and muffled protests. Brooke sat frozen beside Grant's empty seat, face buried in her hands. Officers escorted the four out separately to waiting vehicles outside, flashbulbs from a few discreet media tipped off, anonymously capturing the scene through windows. Inside, conversations erupted in low, urgent tones. Questions about what this meant for ongoing deals. Concerns over stability. Sympathy directed my way from those closest to Grandpa's generation. I remained near the podium, watching as the reality sank in for everyone. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was public, undeniable, with consequences unfolding in real time under bright lights. Grandpa reached for my hand again when I moved closer, squeezing it weakly without a word. His breathing labored, but eyes pleading for some explanation I couldn't give yet. The evening that was meant to celebrate legacy had become its breaking point. Alliances shifting in whispers around us as the full weight of the evidence hung in the air like smoke. Staff began clearing plates, quietly sensing the event was over in every way that mattered. Partners approached hesitantly to offer support or ask discreet questions about next steps, but I deflected gently, focusing on Grandpa's needs first. The drive home later would be quiet, the estate feeling larger and colder than ever. But in that moment, standing amid the fallout, the emptiness gave way to a strange clarity. I'd protected what truly mattered, even if it cost everything else. 10 months later, the dust had settled, leaving the legal outcomes clear and final from the federal court in Chicago. Douglas and Eleanor each received 8-year sentences for conspiracy to defraud and attempted harm, the judge citing the calculated nature of their actions over months. Grant drew 10 years, the additional time coming from his direct role in administering the substance, plus separate financial fraud charges tied to concealing the gambling debts. Victor Langford's company collapsed under the weight of the investigation. Shareholders pulled out contracts, canceled, and regulators shut it down permanently after uncovering related unethical practices. Grandpa Harold made it through the immediate aftermath, though the shock took a visible toll on his strength at 78. He spent weeks quieter than I'd ever seen him, attending follow-up medical checks regularly, but he refused to stay away from the office entirely. A few days each week he'd come in for short visits, sitting in the conference room reviewing summaries I'd prepared, offering insights from decades of experience, without ever bringing up the trial or the people involved. He and I developed a new routine: quiet mornings going over expansion proposals, his presence a steady reminder of why the company had endured. I assumed full control of Stratton Real Estate Group restructuring teams to focus on long-term sustainable projects across Illinois. We closed several major deals for eco-friendly commercial developments in suburban areas like Neepville and Schaumburg, bringing in revenue growth that outpaced previous years significantly. Partners who'd stuck with us through the scandal expressed relief at the direction, and new investors approached cautiously at first but committed once results showed. Daily operations ran smoother without the underlying tensions that had built for so long. Every morning I walked into the main boardroom on the top floor of our downtown headquarters, pausing to adjust the framed photographs on the credenza. I'd added a large print of Grandpa in his 40 seconds, standing proudly on the site of his first major acquisition of vacant lot in the Loop that became our flagship property. Next to it hung the shot from 5 years earlier, of me signing the turnaround agreement that saved us $20 million. Those two images side by side captured the real continuity of the firm. I removed every other family photo that included Douglas, Eleanor, or Grant, replacing them with team achievements and project renderings instead. Brooke finalized the divorce quickly after the arrests and moved out of state, cutting ties completely as far as anyone knew. The estate felt different without the constant comings and goings. I'd grown up with quieter hallways and fewer voices at dinner when Grandpa joined me. We adapted to the new normal, focusing conversations on market trends or upcoming zoning hearings rather than the past. Staff adjusted to loyalty, shifting firmly to the leadership that had steered us through crisis. Looking back on it all now, the experience taught me something fundamental about what holds a legacy together. Blood relations don't guarantee shared values or trust. Sometimes they mask the opposite. True inheritance isn't automatic through birth order or gender. It's earned through integrity, hard work, and choices made when no one is watching. Grandpa and I rebuilt stronger because we prioritized those principles over sentiment. The company thrives today, not despite what happened, but because we refused to let betrayal define its future. Family in the end is who shows up with honesty and commitment.